Chapter 6. Part 1. The three boys led Vivian and Francis outside into the leaf-littered grounds of Murkwater Estate. The late morning downpour had eased, and in its place, a cold wind now bit their cheeks. The silver Toyota sat nearby, parked on the crushed stone of the driveway. It flashed its blinkers at them as Francis waved. Approaching the vehicle, Vivian couldn't help but sneer at the government registration plate fixed beneath its grille. The government had done little to earn his trust in recent weeks. Opening the passenger door, Francis tossed her knapsack onto the seat, then turned and smiled at the other boys. "Give us a moment, guys." "I give you a moment, baby, before Lewis began, but Token slapped a hand over his gob and pulled him away, calling, "We be nearby." Tank lumbered after them without a word or a backward glance. Watching them go, Francis blew on her hands and rubbed them together. "Colourful bunch." Vivian shrugged. "They're okay." Her smile changed and she looked a little sad. "Can we be honest with each other?" Feeling nervous, Vivian slid his hands into his pockets. "I guess so." "You don't like me, do you?" she said. The question caught Vivian off guard. He almost answered truthfully, but caught himself in the last moment. "What does that matter?" "It matters because it affects my professional capacity to help you," she said. Vivian turned her answer around in his head, considering all that it meant before giving her a reply. "Mum liked you." Francis pressed her lips together and nodded. "She was my best friend." Best friends that barely saw each other. The words were out of Vivian's mouth before he could stop them. He expected her to react angrily, maybe rebuke him, but she just continued to smile sadly. "I deserve that," she said. "You're right, I didn't visit enough, but Vivian, that doesn't mean that I didn't care or that I don't miss her now." She bit her lip. "You see, your mum and I, we..." Vivian looked down at his trainers, a fist of fresh grief squeezing his lungs. "I don't want to talk about Mum right now." The smell of apple and vanilla flooded his nostrils, and he realized she was leaning forward. For a moment, Vivian thought she was going to hug him, and conflicting currents of excitement and revulsion surged through him. He felt his cheeks burning and heard his heart drumming in his ears. "Vivian, look at me," she said. He tried, but unable to bear her direct gaze, his eyes darted this way and that until she was reduced to a collection of flashing images. Mouth, lips, throat, unbuttoned collar, the ridge of her collarbone, the thin chain necklace hanging like a cobweb of gold. Then something warm and metallic was pushed into his hand, and looking down he saw it was his mother's phone. "Just in case they're watching," she whispered. "I'm not supposed to give you this." He stared down at the phone in his hand until she closed his fingers around it and pushed it toward his pocket. "Keep it out of sight," she hissed. He quickly slipped the phone into his pocket, and a flood of gratitude swept through him. "You lost your phone in the crash, right?" she continued. Vivian's throat had grown tight and he nodded dumbly. "Well, they have a rule of no contact with the outside world here," Francis continued. "No calls, no messages, and no email. Something to do with character building." Vivian barely registered the distaste in her voice. "But I need to be able to contact you when I need to. It's still on your mum's plan, and I don't know how, but I'll make sure that it gets paid until we sort this mess out." "Listen, he began, but she gripped one of his shoulders. "Think of it as a peace offering," she reassured him. "You ask why it matters, yeah? Well, you don't have to like me, Vivian, but I want you to trust me. I'm going to get you out of here. I promise you that." Vivian felt his stomach settling at her words, but urgency still tugged at him like a stubborn dog. "Keep the investigation going," he said. "The cop, the fat one who was there." Francis nodded. "I heard his statement. He said there was no other car." "He's lying," Vivian snarled. Okay, Francis raised a pacifying hand. "I'll do what I can. Just remember what I said about that." Vivian dropped his scowl. It had just dawned on him for the first time how foolish he'd been behaving toward Francis. She was more than his only ally. She was one of the last pieces of his mother's life that he still possessed, and he couldn't afford to lose her. "If you can do that," he sighed, "I'll trust you." Francis gave him a grateful smile as she slid into the passenger seat, closed the door, and pulled the seatbelt over her. The Toyota's engine had just throbbed to life when Vivian knocked on the window. Francis lowered it for him. "Thanks for the phone," he hastily added. "Our secret," she winked. "Just bear with the choppy coverage, okay? There's not many towers out this way, and using the internet will be as slow as dial-up. My number's in there. If you get into trouble, you can always contact me." And then she was gone. Part 2. The front of Murkwater rose above the boys like a cliff of black rock, imposing and ancient. As he followed Token and the others around the side of the building, Vivian recalled the dean referring to the orphanage as a country house. The description made him smirk. To Vivian, the term offered up images of Kansas homesteads or stone cottages with thatched roofs. From what he had seen so far, Vivian was sure Murkwater could be called many things, but a country house was not one of them. The group reached a small, rusted side gate and Token swung it open for them to pass through. As they moved down a tree-lined lane, small nuts scraped and crunched under their shoes. Vivian's chin went up and up as his gaze climbed the wall to the octagonal brick chimneys outlined against the bruised clouds. "Think of this place as a square," Token said. 4 floors, 4 sides, and 4 wings. In the middle there's a courtyard, just like a castle. You with me? "I'm with you." Vivian sniffed the iron in the damp air. "Pretty fancy here. Must have been quite a place in the day." "I'm guessing so," Token agreed. "Apparently it was built in a Tudor style, whatever the hell that means." "Tudor style?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "What are you, a historian?" "No, he just read it off the plaque on the side of the building," Tank grunted. "He's no genius." "Smarter than you, big guy," Token called over his shoulder. "If it were me, I'd be leaving that big-ass bag inside. No need to drag it around with us." "Yeah, you trying to impress someone?" Lewis added with a knowing smile. "You'll break your back the way you're going." "Break your back, maybe," Tank huffed, still lumbering behind them. Vivian looked back at Tank and was inwardly amazed. There was no doubt in his mind that the big boy, almost a teenager if not already, was much stronger than the rest of the group. But from the way Tank had unslung the duffel bag and now carried it across his broad shoulders, Vivian now wondered if he might be as strong as an adult. However, this idea was checked by the way Tank sagged under the bag's considerable weight. A steady stream of sweat slid along the pipe-like veins in his forehead, and dark patches were spreading under his arms and across the chest of his t-shirt. Vivian forced a smirk onto his face, which the big boy saw, and shot him the middle finger salute. Vivian chuckled at the gesture, but inwardly felt bad. He was not a cruel boy, and secretly wanted to wait for Tank to catch up, but to do so might mean losing the momentum he had already gained in the group. Showing kindness at this early stage might be interpreted as weakness. Vivian knew Tank would be a powerful ally, but only once he, Vivian, was in a higher position, which probably meant there was going to be a fight somewhere along the way. "So where is this plaque?" he offered, trying to keep the conversation going. "Everywhere," Lewis chimed. "Those damn things are everywhere. You take a stroll around this place and 10 minutes later you could be our guide. Look." He pointed at the base of a tree. "Like that one." Vivian saw the tree, then his eyes focused on the metal plate at its base. He took a step toward it, trying to make out the words stamped beneath the green oxidization. "Huntington elm planted in memory of Georgia Wilkins, 1934-1943. He read. "Who's Georgia Wilkins?" "Probably one of the kids that died here," Token shrugged. "It says right there that she was only 9 years old. Not much of a life." "A kid died here?" Vivian said, surprised. "You didn't say anything about that." Token shrugged again. "I said bad things happen." The crisp autumn air was suddenly broken by a flurry of feathers and snapping of twigs. Startled, the boys glanced upward to see a magpie who had been turning lazy circles in the grey sky had now dropped onto a raven resting on its branch. For a moment the struggling, squawking birds plummeted toward the ground, losing feathers. Then they disengaged and clawed at the air in opposite directions. The raven swooped low over the boys, cawing its almost human cry. They watched it flap to the naked branches of another tree before settling and continuing to caw. Somewhere nearby, another raven answered. Lewis reached up and plucked one of the drifting black feathers out of the air. Mouth open, he stared at it with an intensity that Vivian could only describe as awe. Then, twirling the feather in his fingers, he grinned wide and put it behind his ear. "Forest favor, Lewis," Token said with a smile. "Forest favor," echoed Tank. Vivian was about to ask them what they meant, when the Spanish boy guffawed. He threw his fist skyward with the middle finger extended in the direction the magpie had flown. "Fuck you too," quoth the raven. That cracked them all up, and for several moments Vivian found it hard to breathe. He got the feeling he was going to get along just fine with Lewis. He offered the boy a fist, and Lewis practically glowed as he bumped it with his own. Vivian then returned his attention to the plaque. Beneath the stamped letters, a bizarre circular spiral pattern pulled at his gaze. It was around the size of a 50-cent piece, and its maze-like design of swirling lines were etched deep into the metal. "What about that?" he pointed. "Is that Tudor too?" "Who the hell knows?" Token said. "Every plaque's be having one, and like Lewis said, there's a lot of them. Probably just some artistic signature or logo or something." "Yeah, or the devil's thumbprint," Lewis sniggered. Part 3. They continued walking past the north wing at the rear of the house. The landscape changed from overgrown flower gardens and waist-high hedges into a small grove of what Vivian fancied must have been once beautiful trees. Forking trunks sprouted horizontal branches of tiered foliage, now beginning to curl in the grip of the scourge or whatever the sickness twisting the land around the orphanage was called. Vivian spotted another plaque at the base of one trunk and stepped closer to read. Cedar of Lebanon, planted in memory of Teddy Thurston, 1930 to 1944. 14 years old, he murmured. Again, a strange circular spiral pattern was stamped beneath the words. It looked similar to the first, but Vivian couldn't be certain that it was exactly identical. The first pattern had swelled to the left. This one seemed to swell to the right. Guys, he said to no one in particular, you got some weird stuff here at Murkwater. No, kid? Lewis answered. You don't know the half of it. There was a rustle of leaves to Vivian's right, and a raspy voice hissed out from behind a clump of bushes. New kid, eh? It said. I got fresh bird bones to sell if you got something to trade. Token halted the group and glared at the bushes. That be you, King, you lying prick? There was silence in response, and Vivian cocked an eyebrow at Lewis. Did I hear right? Did someone just say bird bones? Lewis just sneered at the foliage as if he hadn't heard the question. You got balls sneaking away from Mallory's fields without permission, I'll give you that. Token continued, still glaring at the bushes. Not brains, though, Lewis muttered. He goes rooting around in any old bush and he'll lose a hand. I know where Mallory keeps his fox traps, the voice snarled, and I'm willing to take the risk to ensure the freshness of the bones that I sell. Fresh bones, my black ass, Token snorted. It's 21 worms for you since you sold me those barbecued chicken bones last week. Two branches parted, revealing the long, pallid face of a boy several years older than Vivian. Narrow eyes leered out at them from behind a curved nose that reminded Vivian of a parrot's beak. The thing that really caught his attention, however, was the dirty, cardboard crown pulled down over the kid's long tangle of black rock star hair. Vivian recognized the Hungry Jack's logo and recalled wearing such crowns at birthday parties when he was little. It made it hard for him to take the newcomer seriously. Careful with that mouth of yours, the face in the bush curled his thin upper lip at Token. My boys don't like it when you spread lies about me. Token folded his arms. Yeah, well, they ain't here right now, are they? Those bones were legit, the boy called King spat. Bobby Rowland is a mouthful of dirt liar. You the liar, King, Token returned. And you leave Bobby Rowland alone, you hearin' me? Vivian looked across at Lewis again. King? Is that his surname or something? It's what he calls himself, Lewis sighed. Token took an angry step off the path and into the garden. Bobby works the same kitchen crew as you, and he tells me he saw you putting those scraps aside after tea time. Them bones ain't fresh. There was the briefest flash of colour in King's pallid cheeks. A bird is a bird is a bird, you turd, he muttered. Insulting your customers, are you, King? Lewis crowed. Hell of a business plan you have there. I insult who I want, King snapped. Bird bones are the best protection there is, everybody knows that. Too bad you can't say the same for your stupid gingerbread dolls. Vivian looked from King to Token. Protection from what? Again, he was ignored. I'm thinking wise men and wizards don't be putting their faith in cooked chooks, Token said with a smirk. It's the worms for you all the same. He crouched and began carefully scraping the soaked leaves and roots aside. Maybe I can't be finding 21, but I'll get enough to make you squirm like one. A twig snapped as King retreated a little, but Token didn't look up. Tank, he said, hold him while I dig them up. Tank advanced on the bushes with wicked glee in his eyes. King looked from side to side, then up at the duffel bag which Tank seemed to be about to hurl at him. He appeared ready to make a break for it. Then he paused and broke into a winning smile. I'll tell you what, he said in a cheerful tone. If we forget the 21 worms right now, I'll ignore that last insult and give each of you a fresh bird bone free of charge. What do you say? He held up a small, dirty-looking bone in his fingers. Token snorted. That ain't the bone of a bird. It is so, King blustered. I found it here in the garden yesterday. A whole wattle bird. I was just cutting the bones out now. If your golem here pounds on me, you'll lose this opportunity. Tank hesitated and looked over his shoulder at Token. What did you just call me? Vivian grinned. I'll show you if you want, King pushed on. But you got to swear you won't tell anyone where it is, and don't let that poser Lewis near it. Lewis rolled his eyes. Yeah, as if. Token looked doubtful, but he shook his head to Tank. The big boy slumped and muttered something nasty before taking a step back. Token raised a hand solemnly. Mouthful of dirt for me if I tell. Vivian had never heard of swearing such a thing, but knew a promise when he heard one. "Step this way, then." King grinned in triumph. "I'll even let you choose." Token disappeared into the bushes behind King, and when he came out a moment later, he looked more relaxed. "I'll take those 3, and 1 more for the new kid," he said, nodding to Vivian. "But you clean them first, King, understand?" "Ah, the new kid," King said, suddenly distracted. He gave Vivian a predatory look. "Don't suppose you have anything worth trading? Bubblegum? New comics? Magazines?" His eyes lit up. "Beer?" Vivian smiled. He'd been on school camps and knew the value of certain items tripled once you got out into the sticks beyond the point of regular supply. Indeed, he had been careful to pack such items, but had no intention of revealing them until he had fully sussed out his market. Maybe later," he said, and turned to follow the other boys who were already trudging away. "Pleasure doing business with you." "As always," King called after them. "Keep your voice down," Token replied. "And you still a lying prick."